And this channel is actually pretty cool in regards of how good they are. They have some of the setup is pretty trash because some of the stuff they do would be super expensive. So actually super expensive. But they have a little bit of trash setup, but do stuff that's high end in regards of what, yeah, it's biology to a higher degree. Yeah, I'm all in autonomy and human autonomy as well. I like it still. Uh, dissecting, for example, dissecting pig's heart was fun. People around left the classroom, and I was super excited. I thought it was pretty nice. Yeah, it it's also like those dudes. They actually have some stuff. They actually do research. Some of the stuff, for example, this one is just basically stupid. It doesn't make sense to make this. It's just I don't know. I think they explained it. It's just yeah, they had the idea and made it. But some of the stuff they actually do quite some research and, for example, growing and manipulating genetics in cells. They do it, and their setup here it's not even that bad. But some of the setup is just home built stuff for growing neurons or something, growing cells and manipulating them, their DNA. That's pretty cool, but also impressive that they can pull it off.
Yo, Justin,
And
you hungry?
one of their big project is they want to grow neurons, then teach them to play Doom. So they want basically just a sprinkle of neurons to play Doom.
You want to grab some lunch?
And
Yeah,
they made some
I'm hungry,
strides
but I've got
recently.
neurons. I'm not gonna have a lot of time.
Don't worry, I got you. Quick, Jonah, grab the case!
Ah.
Smoke. There we go.
Single-use instant hot dog. Of all of the silly sentences we've said on this channel, this one might be my favorite. This, like many of our projects...
The thing is, the most for if you want to be on YouTube with chemistry or whatever. So, for example, Mile Red, he's very good in chemistry. His channel stuff is sometimes, I don't know, a 2-hour video about making one specific thing out of chemistry, but he has a nice way to film stuff. He has a very nice sounding voice. Then he often does stuff that's actually interesting, but not really has chemistry, high level chemistry, but the end result, you don't need that really. It's just, yeah, I had an idea, let's make it. And yeah, it works. He sounds good, so even if you're not really into chemistry or something, and you just want a nice sounding ASMR style voicey in background, his channel is probably a good choice. But at the same time, he knows his stuff. He is a good chemist.
Started as
And you need
but
to
when we
be
started talking-
entertaining if you want to do this kind of stuff on YouTube. Since, yeah, chemistry or, I don't know, physics or so on is not really the most engaging subject, usually.
about it, we realized it would probably be fairly easy to implement, and before we knew it, we were speccing out materials for an instant hot dog cooker, and a military-grade one at that. Now, right off the bat, there were some choices to make, because cooked can mean a lot of things. Hot dogs actually come pre-cooked from the factory, so while it may not be the best way, you can eat them straight out of the package. But in general, if you go to a hot dog stand on the street, those dogs are either boiled or grilled. We considered doing both, but what started as a silly idea turned into more than a month-long research project to actually make the first version work. Remember, we do things not because they are easy.
Yeah, in America they put on, I think some pickle whatever. I don't know what it is exactly. I'm not American, but they put some weird stuff on the hot dog. So mustard, ketchup, and something else, but I don't know what it is exactly. It looks disgusting though.
Because we think they'll be easy. So today we're
That's a very good sentence.
Long research project to actually make the first version work. Remember, we do things not because they are easy, but because we think they'll be easy.
Yeah,
so today we're going with
easy.
boiled, but let us know in the comments if you'd like to see a grilled version in the future. Initially, we did do some experiments to see if it was possible to cook a hot dog from the inside.
Those things are actually super damn hot. I used them for something. I used material for heating up something before, because I didn't remember what it was, but I wanted to quickly heat up some metal, and I just used one of those thingies. Yeah.
But when we tried inserting a tube into a
that
hot
looks
dog
disgusting.
and then jamming a sparkler down the hole,
This would maybe work if you surround it with sparklers. So surrounding heat and maybe insert heat, but yeah.
is a sort of slow form of thermite. All we got was a slightly...
Yeah, in Austria we don't really have that kind of hot dog. We have something similar, but probably better. Since the sausage, I don't really like it, but the sausage looks higher quality. Yeah. Just ram metal and
absolutely
the best thing is over here before in the experiment before they used a metal rod to not contaminate the hot dog itself, but you can see they didn't hear for this reason.
Slow form of thermite. All we got was a slightly warm hot dog and an absolutely charred core. So we knew it would have to be cooked exclusively from the outside, because if we're doing this incredibly silly project, I won't settle for anything less than a perfectly cooked hot dog.
Yeah, the American hot dog seems super disgusting, to be honest. The quality standards they have is, I don't know, scary. Yeah. What if you have a metal insufficiency? What if you need some more metal in your diet?
That's right, Fink. Look at those steaming weenies.
Since we're going with boiling our weenies, we needed a way to rapidly heat water to as close as boiling as possible. We ended up taking inspiration from this now discontinued product that makes a hot cup of coffee using a charge of thermite built into the can.
Imagine coming up with that idea. Selling coffee with a thermite charge.
The idea was that you twist the bottom, which sets off
Coffee
the
is
chemical
nice,
reaction.
but I literally prefer cold coffee. So I hate warm coffee. Coffee is for me just cold.
And generates a huge amount of heat very quickly to warm the coffee. For those of you unfamiliar, classical thermite is a highly exothermic mixture of aluminum powder and iron oxide. The aluminum
3-to-1. So 3 yeah, I think 3-to-2. So 3 parts of iron oxide, so rust, and 2 parts of aluminium powder. Mix it together, and you have basically basic thermite. It's not as good as the bought one, since if you buy it, it usually has some hydro coating, so if it gets wet, it's not as big of an issue. But if you ignite thermite and you would pack it into a shape where it's not just powder, you can literally let it burn underwater.
acts as the fuel
Thermite
and
is
rips
cool.
the oxygen off of the iron oxide, leaving behind molten iron as the mixture burns.
And if you use magnesium instead of the aluminium, you could get something that's even more explosive.
being set off in flower pots on YouTube, thermite has a variety of industrial applications, including welding train tracks together or anything else where you need a ton of molten iron very quickly. But what we found when we looked into it was that the coffee cans use a weird proprietary thermite that the company had developed, and isn't the usual aluminum and iron oxide stuff. While iron oxide and aluminum is the classic recipe, there's lots of ways to make thermite that replace either the type of oxide used or the metal, and depending on your choice, the reaction will be more or less violent. Silicon dioxide, for example, also known as sand, quartz, or just silica, burns much slower and releases less energy than
Let's
iron
make
oxide,
class.
though also at the cost of being harder to start and maintain the burn. You can see that even with the help of some magnesium ribbon, getting silica thermite to burn on its own is very difficult.
It looks
While
also
it technically
pretty
releases enough
weird.
energy to be
The gray
self-sustaining,
tone.
you usually need to add another ingredient like sulfur to keep the reaction burning hot enough. The problem with this is adding ingredients like
Yeah, I guess it's always satisfying to just have glowing hot metal. I played around with hot metal very often in real life. I literally, I don't think that's the pair of pants, but I literally have pants where I dropped molten metal on them or red hot glowing metal. So I got splashed with molten metal before and still did it, since working with metal is fun.
sulfur will produce
Yeah,
an
the powdery
enormous amount
texture.
of gas. So if we want to contain the thermite even a little bit inside of a canister, this is a recipe for...
This reminds me of how easy it is to make a rocket fuel, at least trashy one, which is basically sugar rockets.
very, very bad situations. The coffee cans use some sort of silica thermite, but beyond that, we don't know what other ingredients they added to control the reaction and make it easy enough to start.
Imagine
So
you,
we had to
you
just
want to heat up your coffee and it just sprays molten metal into your face.
start from scratch and develop our own. We started with normal iron thermite as our control. This sort of thermite has a bunch of characteristic properties. For one, it tends to spray a ton of stuff everywhere and make a huge mess.
Yeah.
But beyond that, something I don't think most videos of it make clear is just how bright these reactions are. We had welding masks on to protect our eyes, and even after the reaction, the puddle of molten slag and iron it leaves behind is so bright that it hurts to look at with your bare eyes. Keep in mind, classical thermite burns at temperatures well over 3000 degrees Celsius. Some of the hottest types of thermite can get even hotter by a few thousand degrees, to the point that they throw off an enormous amount of UV light.
Thermite is actually scary. That's hot enough to instantly burn everything you want, basically.
Enough to get a tan just from being near it during that initial burst of light. So it should be said not to try anything you're about to see at home.
But it's so
Thermite
easy to
is
make.
extremely dangerous, and not only can it burn you, but blind you as well. We're doing these tests in a controlled environment with trained professionals and an abundance of safety equipment at the ready. To help
1 second. I watched a few YouTubers who did a bit of nuclear stuff. But yeah, nuclear experiments are a little bit of a problem. Since, yeah, you can't really make anything that's super interesting without dying.
show just how bright we're talking about, here's one where I've used as much neutral density and ISO reduction and all that kind of stuff as I could to try and show the reaction while it's at its peak. You can now only just barely see the sparkler that we're using to ignite it, but when the reaction starts, the camera still just gets absolutely maxed out.
Let's make
Slowing the footage
flashbangs.
down though, you can see that it burns like the sun, and the room becomes clearly visible for a moment, even through all that darkness. Okay, now let's see what all of this
Imagine
energy
just having a bag of thermite in the middle of the night and just throwing it somewhere. Basically throwing a flashbang,
do
just
when we
randomly.
use it to heat water. We set a charge of thermite inside of a sort of test tube that we made out of copper pipe, and then
I wouldn't be convinced that this holds, since yeah, copper has a relatively high melting point, but if you can melt the solder with your blowtorch, usually the stuff is not very... It's very easy to melt. I think it's around 400 degrees.
Then set that in a beaker of water with a thermocouple. As before, it sprays a ton of stuff everywhere, leaving the water tinged a little bit red. And sometimes it would just melt through the copper because the heat wasn't getting conducted away quickly enough. So even though the reaction is really hot, it doesn't do a great job heating the water because of how much material gets ejected and wasted. But you can see the water does boil for a moment, and the water does jump about 50 degrees. So obviously we're going to need to tame this mixture a little bit if we want to be setting it off inside a partially sealed tube. There will be a vent hole in the hot dog cooker, but too much gas and it could still burst the tube. And we also don't want hot bits of iron flying out the vent either. So anything
let's do that on New Year's,
slow the reaction
especially
without
if you
cooling it
threw
off
that onto a street. The street thermite produces molten metal, which would fuse with the street, so you would just have a huge lump of molten metal in the fused with the asphalt, and I'm pretty sure you can't remove it without breaking the asphalt.
much, but also can't produce any
And
more
you
gas
would
than is
maybe
absolutely
get charged with vandalism or a little bit of terrorism. It depends.
necessary. The solution we found was to use quartz sand mixed into the thermite. When you add the right amount, it still burns really well, but it doesn't spray stuff everywhere. While the silica can burn in the reaction, any that doesn't just melts and acts as a sticky glue to hold the burning mass together. To figure out the right amount, we tested 3 different concentrations of silica. At 20%, it still burns pretty violently. It doesn't quite go whoosh as much or throw as much debris, but it is not a slow burn by any measure.
Scary.
In the tube test, this mixture did look promising as it didn't just eject all the material, but the flame coming out the top was still pretty large and sparky. And we learned that even though it is more tame, it's not nearly tame enough. Sometimes it would still just melt the copper.
Yeah.
Though molten copper does heat the water pretty effectively, so that's kind of progress.
That looks scary.
At 40%, the mixture burns much more slowly and maintains a steady burn for a few seconds.
To be honest, this
is the
still
exact
looks
behavior
scary.
we're looking for. And in the tube test, again, it burns nice and evenly, and you can see that it does a great job of imparting its energy into the water, making it
But
boil
yeah,
steadily.
it's not
At
glowing
60%,
red,
things
which
get a
is
bit
probably
iffy. The
a
mix
good
burns
sign.
even more slowly, but we started running into issues of the mix not burning properly or failing to ignite, which is really bad. The only thing more dangerous than an armed incendiary device is one triggered that didn't activate.
Yeah,
At
that's
this point,
true.
we were feeling really confident about this project because we had a mix that heated the water and was pretty controllable. That is, until we tried to light the thermite without using either a sparkler or magnesium ribbon. You see that one
Yeah.
of the issues with thermite is that its ignition temperature is hotter than most fire burns. Once it gets going, it burns like a hot damn, but if I literally just point a blowtorch at a pile of thermite, it usually won't go. Fire just isn't hot enough, and apparently the little plasma lighters you can buy aren't either. This kicked off another solid 2 weeks of tinkering.
I think I either decided or they will say it. You can apparently buy pre-made thermite, which reminds me always about the interesting thing. It is apparently you can carry transport several kilos of C4 in a car without any warning whatever, since C4 is apparently so unreactive that you don't need any warning shields or whatever if you transport it, since it's a few kilos of C4, so nothing would happen even if you came into a car crash or whatever. You can literally throw C4 in a campfire and it wouldn't explode. You can put it into a microwave, nothing would happen. But still nuts that you could just transport C4, at least in the US. I'm not sure if it's the same here. But yeah, transporting kilos of pretty good explosives, just have it in your trunk, it's fine.
Trying to make a mixture that was both sensitive enough to be lit by an electric igniter, stable enough to not be dangerous to be around, and burns hot enough to start the thermite. Oh, and of course, produce as little gas as physically possible. Unfortunately, because I don't want the bomb squad at my lab for the 3rd time, I can't actually tell you what we settled on for the fuse material, but I will say that I have never had such a difficult time getting things to burn in my life. Which, to be fair, is why some places will sell pre-mixed thermite. It's essentially just inert rust unless you can get it above 1600 degrees, and evidently a spark
usually you
pretty
use
hot to set it off. The fused
use
material was mounted to the igniter, and then we used
what's it called? Magnesium strips to ignite thermite. That's the magnesium strips are also pretty cool. If you just have a roll of magnesium strips, you can just hang them somewhere, light them, and they will burn somewhat fast, but you can, with one small magnesium strip, this is basically like an ultra flashlight. That thing will light out a huge area, and it's just a little piece of metal, but it burns up. That's a problem.
some tissue paper to make a tube around the fuse that we could fill with thermite to make sure it's in good contact. This can then be stuck into the thermite charge to get it to light consistently. Okay,
Not
we
at
got
all
the
sketchy.
hot stuff mostly under control now. Time to actually build the cooker. The design is pretty simple. It's basically 3 sections: the cooking area, the thermite canister, and an igniter on the side. The main chamber is heat sealed shut and holds both the water and hot dog ready to be used. The thermite chamber is designed to come apart because we did intend these to be recommissionable, even if that didn't end up being the case. In terms of machining, we really only had to make 2 parts, both out of aluminum. The first has a lip for the polycarbonate tube to be glued onto. Then the part was drilled and bored out. First to the inner diameter of the copper tubing we're using, and then an inner lip was added for the copper tube to sit on. After those features had been turned on the lathe, it was cleaned up
Just
and then
with a
brought over to the
Sharpie.
tube to sit on. After those features had been turned on the lathe, it was cleaned up and then brought over to the mill to form the vent hole on the
Top
side.
tier engineering.
The other aluminum piece is a plug to fit into the bottom. It has an O-ring groove cut into it so that any gases are forced to go out the vent and can't escape through the bottom. Also, to prevent it popping off like a champagne cork, we drilled and threaded holes both into it and the top piece so they could be bolted together. We also drilled a pair of holes for the igniter wires. Now, we need to join the aluminum piece to the copper tubing, but before we do that, each of the copper pieces were electroplated in bright nickel. This is to prevent the copper leaching into the water and
I like nickel baths, and the color is just, I like the color. It's a beautiful color.
the hot dog, and also just because we're super
Turquoise,
extra and thought it would look pretty.
Yeah.
So I spent hours carefully polishing each of the tubes to prepare them for plating. Oh, and as you saw in the intro, we made a bunch of these things, so this process
Yeah,
was
with a
repeated
lathe, it's
many
a
times.
bit easier
In terms
to
of
polish
plating, we whipped
stuff,
up
I
a
guess.
super fast, bright nickel plating bath. The ingredients are 25 grams of nickel sulfate, a teaspoon of salt, a sprinkle of either ascorbic or citric acid, and then a tiny bit of a surfactant. Here I'm using tween 20, but a tiny drop of dish soap will likely work as well. We're not going for suds or foaming, we just need a little bit to break the surface tension. As you can tell by how I gave these measurements, the exact quantities of most of the ingredients don't matter. For the plating, I'm using a nickel electrode connected to the positive lead of my bench power supply, and the tube I connect to the negative. Ignore the color of the wires here, they're backwards. No matter how many times I've done this, I
This
always
is
get
a
anode
pretty
and cathode
easy
backwards.
thing to do. You can basically do it also with copper. Yeah, copper and nickel are probably most common materials to do this with. It's a relatively easy process, but yeah, it makes basically nothing something that's not metal to metal.
Backwards, because chemists and physicists go by opposite names and can't agree. I've set the supply to 8 volts and about 1 amp max. Rather than leaving the tube in the solution, I kept it constantly moving and would periodically rotate it to try and get a nice even coating. If a blemish developed that looked darker and not shiny, I'd clean off the piece, then pop it back on the lathe for a quick polish touch-up, followed by a few more dunks in the plating bath. With that done, we could join the copper tube to the machined aluminum parts, but we can't use epoxy here because this metal will be exposed directly to the thermite.
Yeah,
The last thing
epoxy
we
would,
want is water leaking
stink
onto the
a
burning
bit.
thermite, so we picked up this special solder specifically made to join aluminum and copper.
Usually, I think you would use something like silver solder,
Though I will say this stuff is not easy to work with. You have to get both pieces incredibly
but
hot
yeah,
and leaving enough gap for
aluminium
the
is
solder to
apparently
kind of
pretty
drip
hard to
into
work
a
with
little
in
bit,
that
as it
regard.
doesn't wick very well. But after a few failed attempts, we learned how to get it to make a nice, tight, strong join. Unfortunately, that joint looks like crap, so I carefully
Yeah.
trimmed off the excess metal on the lathe. With that done, everything was again polished and then popped back into the plating bath just to tidy things up and to make sure that this weird solder is fully covered with a food-safe metal. At this point, the cookers are mostly done and there's only a few things left to do. The first is to epoxy on the polycarbonate tube and the igniters. Then we 3D printed a few pieces to make it all sit together nicely and a safety cover to make sure that they cannot be set off by accident. Then we of course need to load the
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's just a normal lighter they just stuck in there. Probably with the cables over here, and then here is a slightly more volatile mix that sets off the actual
safety cover to make sure that
charge.
they cannot be set off by accident. Then we of course need to load the tube with its hot dog and enough water to cover it. We heat sealed the tube closed with a removable lid and popped a safety cap on top so the seal doesn't get damaged. Though we did learn it is excruciatingly important to remove the heat seal before
Yeah.
setting off the device.
Steam bomb.
Fire extinguisher, fire extinguisher, fire extinguisher, right now.
That looked like fun.
Fire extinguisher, fire extinguisher, fire extinguisher, right now.
Finally, the tubes need to be armed. We're using a 15-gram charge of our special thermite here, which we tamp into the end of the tube gently before adding the igniter and packing the rest of the tube with K-wool. This will help contain the reaction so the thermite doesn't get
That's
sprayed
actually
out
a
of the vent,
huge
while still allowing gas
empty
to
space
escape.
in there.
After that, everything
So
is
they don't
closed
fill
up
the
and the
whole
cooker is
tube.
ready for use. Alright, I'm hungry and was promised a hot dog, so let's get cooking. For our final version, we also added a removable base to prevent the thing tipping over. But when everything was set and we pushed the button, the result was magical.
Calling cooking a hot dog magical is very interesting.
Smoke.
The pure magic of, I don't know, science.
There we go.
But yeah, it works, I guess. The thing is,
And
would
finally,
have
I
to
give
take
you
it
what
apart
may be the
completely
best piece of
to
thermal camera
reuse it.
footage ever recorded. You can actually see the silhouette of the hot dog as the water starts to heat up, but by the time it's done cooking and we pull it out at the end, it is a perfectly cooked hot dog, cooked through
okay,
and ready to eat. I've been
that's a
making
bit
videos on this platform.
cold. You at least want it to be at around 70 degrees. Usually, if you make food, since it's after 70 degrees, it's somewhat sterilized.
Since 2011, and it has
somewhat.
changed a lot in that time. By far the biggest change
Okay, I think that was it.